Hello, everybody. Welcome to our Tuesday night Indie Memphis Movie Club discussions. Tonight, before we get into the discussion, I do want to make a few quick announcements. Festival submissions for the 2020 Indie Memphis Film Festival, we officially closed July 1st, so make sure you get your submissions in before then. Right now, the films that we have available through our platform, we have Miss Juneteenth and The Killing Floor, also featured on Movie Club, I believe through the end of this week. We will be making announcements on future films very shortly. For our Movie Club discussion next week, we will be having a conversation with John Crawford, who was a resident at Crosstown Arts a few years ago. And that will be moderated by theater educator at Hendrix College and former Memphian, Tony Horn. And this event will be in partnership with Crosstown Arts. And again, be looking for emails for more information on next week's discussion. And thank you all for joining us tonight. So we are with the co-directors of the incredible and very beautiful slice of life documentary, Queen of Lapa. We've got Carolina and Teddy. Hi, guys.
It's good to see you.
So excited to have you guys here tonight. So thank you for taking the time to discuss your most recent and very beautiful film with us. As we get started, I just want to start out with just some simple questions. The background for both of you. Were you always in filmmaking? What was your journey up until you started making films? If that's always what you've done.
No, I was not in filmmaking. I'm from Brazil, born and raised in Rio de Janeiro. And what got me to the United States was I was a dancer. So I danced for several different companies and got invited to join a dance company in the United States, danced with them for many, many years. And I've always said that if I wasn't a dancer, I wanted to be a filmmaker. And many moons ago, I met Teddy, who is a filmmaker, and we fell in love and we've been together ever since. So I started to get involved by producing his films, sometimes acting in the films, and then this is my directorial debut.
Yay! Congratulations.
For me, I started really in street photography. That was my initial kind of love in the art realm. And so that brought me to an art school where I started painting and doing other things. But my photography just kind of naturally grew into series, which then became film. And so when I really fell in love with film, I transferred to film school and sort of met Carol relatively soon after that. So, but yeah, I've been making films since I was 18, so.
Awesome. So before we jump into Queen of Lapa, I do want to make everyone aware we have a previous relationship between you guys as filmmakers and as an actress with Indie Memphis. Do you want to take a minute to talk about how our relationship came to be with Indie Memphis?
Well, we had made a film called Tormenting the Hen, which showed at Sidewalk, and Carol was the star of that film, and it's a really interesting film about just the cultural melee that we're experiencing now. And I had met you at Sidewalk and convinced you to come to the screening, and everything's history after that, I guess.
And I remember him calling from Sidewalk, and he said, "She came to the screening. She came to the screening." Yeah. Like, yes, you went to the screening.
Well, and I'm so glad I did, because that has become, I know, like for many people, one of my favorite films on the circuit from the past few years. You guys actually, Tormenting the Hen was one of our winners from that year. You won the Duncan Williams Screenwriting Award. Shout out to Duncan Williams. Yeah. Thank you for being one of our biggest sponsor. But yes, you guys won an award that year. So you are alum and previous award winner. So
I still wish I thought of something better to say when I accepted it. But yeah.
We were so shocked. It was such an honor. Yeah.
Well, it's great to have you guys back, and also with some follow-up work. So with that said, let's jump into this really, like I said in the beginning, really incredible, beautiful documentary. And it's such an interesting story, and obviously very interesting characters. How did this story come to fruition? So what did that look like, and how did you find Luana in this incredible community that she's created?
Well, it was a long, winding road. As Carol said, she's from Rio, so we've been going back and forth to Rio for many years during that time period. We haven't really been back since 16 when we shot the film, but between like 2008 to 13, we're kind of periodically going back. We shot a documentary there in 2008 in Brasilia, and where Carol grew up is where, like at the corner of the end of her street is where the trans sex workers work. And what struck me as a street photographer as really interesting is just how integrated they were in the community, just given the level of violence towards them in South America and Brazil. And but in this one little kind of corner, it seemed just so naturally a part of the texture of everyone's lives. It wasn't like this thing, and I found that very interesting. And so we were talking a lot about it, like every trip that we'd go back, like what's the history of this block and why is it that way? And one night we were talking to her family about it, and it turns out her father had something to do with the negotiation between I don't know if it was Luana directly, but it was kind of someone, in the community, and then someone in the community of which she lived to kind of negotiate
So the community association of the block was trying to stop the girls from working on that block. And what my dad helped create was a conversation with the residents of that area that they're doing nothing wrong. They're not doing anything, no harm to anyone. So why not let them be on the block and work? Which led to the community just dropping the whole idea of doing a petition to not allowing them to be there.
And just over the years, it was just, interesting. And so kind of one friend led to another friend that then told us about Luana. And it was just such a compelling story. And we started, just kind of researching a little bit about it. And we're kind of blown away that she existed in this community. And so we kind of set out to meet her in a way, just as a person, because she was such an activist and had been through so much that, a towering figure of just courage, So I guess long story short, I don't know, you want to pick it up from here?
So we finally figured out where she lives, and she lives right across the street from where the hostel is in the film. And we begged for her to meet us, and she wouldn't open the door or meet us. So Teddy and I went to this little bar next door to her home and just wrote a heartfelt letter on paper and printed some of Teddy's photography work. And we asked the doorman to put it under her door. So by the time we got to my mom's house, the phone rang and it was Luana. And Luana said, I saw the pictures, I love it, come back. So we quickly ran back to her house, and we spent a good 4 to 5 hours that night just talking to her. And that's when we learned about the house. And that's when we were like, okay, we need your blessing. We want to make a movie about you and the house. And she said yes.
Yeah, at first it was like I'd been taking street photography in Rio for years, and kind of amassed all this body of work. And initially I just felt like I had to include the sex workers because it's just a part of the natural order of the street. But obviously I'm not going to just go up and do that. So,
right.
But when we met Luana and just heard her story, that just it just expanded into this otherworldly dimension of something that we needed to kind of tell the world. So,
right. So that's really interesting. So it's like, so you wrote her, do you think, don't know how to frame this. So do you think it was the letter? Because I imagine she and I imagine that she's used to being exploited, right?
Yeah.
Which I'm, obviously, I'm sure that was why it took, some time and a number of steps in order to earn her trust. So what do you think that it was that made her be like, you know what, I can trust these two filmmakers to document my story and document what I'm doing here?
Well, do you want to go?
Yeah, I think also we were very clear with her that we didn't have an agenda. And we were very transparent to that we were not after any type of exploitation. And we understand that the trans world, the sex work world is filled with work that is very exploitive. And we then explained that we wanted to do a direct cinema film. So we would not be doing interviews. We would just really be a fly on the wall, which was a very new concept for her because so many people, she has had Vice be in her house and she kicked them out.
Wow.
She's used to media.
And then initially, like the photography and then the note, she was just like, "You guys are artists." Like that's how she greeted us at the door. And so we were just kind of meeting as artists. And as the night went on, it was like our interest in her was as much as she was in us. And it just kind of went back and forth in this way. And in terms of the film, we didn't even expect to think that. But by the end of the night, we're like, would you be interested in something like that? And then we talked about she's like, what's the story going to be? And we just kept saying, there is no story. We have no idea. Like there's, this is how we work. This is how we enjoy documentary. And
right.
It'll just be whatever it is, if it's, so.
Well, and she also rented us one day of shooting to start. So take it. So we spent a whole day, and at the end of the day, we all became friends very quickly with everybody, and she's like, "You can come back another day," and then it just kept progressing to like, just come whenever you want.
And actually, she wasn't even supposed to be in the documentary because she told us about the house, and what struck us about the house was just like this. I don't know what the word is, but it's like she created this situation of positivity within darkness that we just found to be really important to kind of share with the world as like a model of how this situation could be in, South America or whatnot. And so that was important to document. Like that already was the legacy of her, besides her, which like if you even Google her, like there's been all sorts of stuff about her. And so, but as the trust grew and her, we talked more, and then she would come back and it got to the point where it's like, obviously she's like the star of the film, but so.
Yeah, it's interesting. And so for some of our audience members that may not be as fluent in different, languages and styles within film, you mentioned direct cinema. And I know that documentaries, and especially on certain subject matters, it's very easy to get into exploitation and kind of a very voyeuristic approach. But this very much felt like, a slice of life. And it, everything that I've heard you guys speak about in conversations between us and in interviews, you very much speak about your intention and how direct cinema and your intention your approach to capturing this story. So can you speak a little bit more about that and maybe kind of define a little bit what that approach means, and then how that looked in actual execution? And perhaps was there anything that you learned navigating the situation?
All right, who wants to begin? Oh gosh. Well, first of all, direct cinema, in my mind anyways, or my interpretation of it from studying it, is direct observation. And people a lot of talk about the term cinema verte, but cinema verte is different from direct cinema, because in direct cinema, the filmmakers could find themselves in a scene, and you're not denying that from the film. You're not hiding and pretending you're not there, which is like a big difference in my mind when I think about those two things. Everybody like says cinema verte, but cinema verte is the term that the French used to describe direct cinema to begin with. So And I'm from Boston, so I'm like sort of proud of that, you know, genre because it has heavy roots in Boston. But part of it is not asking questions, just simply observing, and there's no like imposed narrative to the story at all, which is opposite to everything that's done now, where even if it's a supposed cinema verte, it's like you watch it and it's like clearly not. They had a certain agenda, or it's leading up to the big game, or you know, or something is built into the story to drive it to be a narrative.
Right.
So that was part of it. So we didn't have any interviews whatsoever. It was just a matter of like trust and sharing, and it was just the two of us in the room, and so.
And they just felt so comfortable that I think because we would not speak at all to them, they would just come and start talking. Like sometimes it looks like we were asking questions. There was just one question I asked, and that was because I totally broke character of being the filmmaker, and I was just curious when Mariana is in bed, it's like she's so in love, and she can't, oh my gosh, she's so in love, but she wasn't in love the day before. So I was like, when did you meet this guy? And she said 4 hours ago. I was like, oh, okay. And that was the only question, but yeah.
Yeah, and it's not like we didn't talk to them. We like hung out, and I mean, we'd be like hours and hours in a room with one person. You're just gonna have personal conversations, like, oh, we have a cat, and you know, just how people talk. But we didn't ask like probing, voyeuristic type things, you know, because it wasn't how you build friendships in real life. So, you know. And
I think most important, we made a movie that we would like to watch. I'm personally turned off when I'm watching a documentary that, you know, breaks into the slow motion, and then it feels like a music video all of a sudden. And then, and you clearly see that someone asked the subject to repeat what they were doing because they didn't get the scene. So we are turned off by that, and we just made a movie that we would want to watch.
Right.
And there's actually one moment where, like, you're talking about the process. I think, like, I remember you started to talk about the process in action. So in action, there were moments where, like, we could ask a question, like, somebody's going, or like when she said reenactment, there was a moment where we looked at each other and we're like, because I was the cameraman and I was freaking out because I was like doing sound too, and we had some camera malfunctions, and this amazing moment happened where Gabby had talked on the phone with her mom, and it was just like amazing. And we looked at each other. I was like, sure, Carol. I'm like, nope, that's the role. Like, no, we're not. And Gabby would be happy to do it, but and then that kind of naturally bled into the story of her talking about her dad, which, you know, so.
Right. Wow. And just real quick, I know, because I'm looking at my list of questions for everybody who's watching. If you're on Zoom, you can type your question into the chat box. You can use the Q&A box. You can also raise your hand, and I can call on you if you'd like to ask the filmmakers a question directly. If you're on YouTube or Eventive, we do have Indie Memphis staff members monitoring. So please, as something comes up, type in your question, and I'll be sure that we get time to ask Teddy and Carolina those questions. So in terms of, so you were kind of like this like fly on the wall. You're not interacting necessarily, asking questions. Was there any sort of boundaries set up front in terms of what was off limits completely? Because I imagine that, you know, if Luana is giving you this opportunity, trusting you and giving you this opportunity, I imagine it wasn't without some ground rules, just even for the safety of herself and all of the women that live in the hostel.
We have one rule: not to film the clients.
Yeah. Anything else we could film, and then it was just a matter of taste, which, you know, that's as simple as that. But when the clients would come in, it became a dangerous situation, and we're not interested in the clients anyways, so.
Right, it's not about them.
But I mean, it was an immediate tension, like could be violent, and.
Oh yeah.
So that's why, like, you see them, but then the camera's turning away, and there's a lot of footage that I cut out that is just like those moments where, we're not filming you, and you know.
You wanted to be respectful of the one rule you're given.
Yeah, we don't want to impede on their business too, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
there was a constant like yelling, "Don't worry, they're not filming you. Come on, come on."
Right. This is their livelihood. This is their sex workers. You know, this is their work, and you certainly don't want to impede on that.
Especially in the house where it's safe. So,
right.
You know.
I mean, safety has to be number one. Were there any moments like that you just felt like maybe we should just call it a day, or it's time to wrap it up, maybe move out of the house just for the safety of the women?
Not in the house, no, but there were moments outside that we had to stop, run, and hide.
Wow.
Yeah.
Just shooting on the streets. Yeah.
Yeah, like immediately when you're shooting, like within seconds, so like there's just people coming around, and so
yeah, I imagine that could be.
So those were the only moments that were more like filmed from further away, so that just people on the street wouldn't just see the camera and start coming or something.
Right. So then how was it then, Teddy, for you? Are you fluent in Portuguese? Are you?
No, I'm not fluent. Like, I can understand better than I can speak, partly out of shyness. And I can understand like her family, and because most conversations have like a format of context, right? We're talking about the film, and so you can kind of follow and catch words and stuff like that. I can do, and I've studied Spanish, and it's similar. So like in a family context, I can follow along.
Right.
And I thought I would be able to do that in this context.
Right.
And I wasn't worried about it. I was like, okay, I'll just do what I usually do. But then the first day I was like, I have no idea. Because I couldn't even catch words because it didn't sound like the Portuguese I had heard before.
Well, it's a mixture of accents from all over Brazil. Most of the girls come from the north, which is a different accent. Sure. And they have their slang. They have this slang that I didn't know what they were talking about. And several times through the translation process, I had to Google, and if I couldn't figure out on Google, I had to say, what does that mean? This
right.
Talking about. So it was challenging at times for me to even understand, like, what is the meaning of what you're saying?
Right.
I think it was actually better in the end because it almost created a more of an intimate relationship with me with them than otherwise, because when we would speak, you know, or I would have a conversation with Luana, like looking at her eyes and talking, and Carol would we'd kind of do one of these. But usually when there's a translator, the people are looking at the translator to speak. Like if you see interviews of, you know, usually the person's like, can you say this? And there's not that direct, like eye to eye, like soul relationship.
Right.
So after a couple of days, it was like, you're filming the spirit of the person and the energy in the room. And it was not about the conversation, because some of the times the conversation, I could tell that a certain character would, sorry, I said character, but certain person would, you could tell they're kind of performing in a way or trying to, and that's not what, you know, and you just slide away from them and get to the real conversation, and it just happened kind of organically. So.
You know, I've heard you guys talk about, especially Carolina, how you talked about the editing process, because, you know, for whatever reason, it didn't, I mean, it's like I thought about it, but then to hear you guys speak about that specifically and how long that took was really fascinating, because you do have to translate everything. So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about what that process was like, because the film is a very tight 73 minutes. So I guess maybe even just to back up a little bit further before we get to the editing, you know, how long did you shoot? You know, whether it's like over a period of time, and then what is it like, what did it look like from your day to day? And then what did it look like in the editing room?
It was tough. The editing was really tough. So we started with the translation, and it was important to have everything subtitled, because we know that we're going to go through several iterations of the edit. And we have to have everything subtitled.
And that took 2 years.
Yeah.
We were working on this for a long time. I guess I just didn't realize.
Yeah.
We shot in 2016, right after the Olympics. We shot for roughly almost 3 weeks that we were in a house every single day. So there was a lot of footage.
Yeah.
And once we got back, I mean, I do have a full-time job too, so I couldn't just be like translating all the time. And it's hard to find someone that can come to our place to translate and put it the subtitles. But we did find an angel. Her name is Viviane, and she's Brazilian. She's a journalist. She lives in New York, and
she's from Rio, and
yeah,
so she was like everything, you know, because we didn't have any grant money or anything like that to offer really. Towards the end, we just started having, you know, we're like, we have to give something, but she just really grounded out. And like we were talking about before, like, you know, even being from Rio, it's hard to understand like certain phrasing and words and slangs. And so Carol and her would have conversations and they would talk to their moms about what this mean, you know, it was really intense to get like the words on each single card, you know, to make sense in a way that is translatable, you know.
Yeah.
But once everything was translated, I think the editing took 6 months, and that was a pretty solid, like full-time editing, and then Matt Grady came to help with the edit,
the final cut.
For the final cut too.
Wow.
And it was very emotional too. At times we would cry on the editing room because, you know, of Luana and how we were so sad that she passed and she didn't get to see the film. So it was an emotional process too.
Yeah. And we will get back to that. And also for anybody, hopefully we're not any spoiler alerts. Hopefully you've seen the film at this point. If not, please, please, please go watch it. But we will definitely be talking more about the ending of the film, which we tend to veer away from on other movie night clubs. But I think with this particular film, it's very important to put the whole picture into context. So kind of with that said, I'm going to shift back a little bit to the exploitation piece we talked about up front, because there is, and talk about archival footage, because there is only one moment of using archival footage. And it was really an interesting, it was a choice, right? It was definitely a choice. So I guess I want to hear a little bit about that choice to use archival footage when you hadn't used it anywhere else in the film. And then what was it about that particular piece of archival footage that you felt was really important?
Yeah, I mean, that show in Brazil is a very popular show.
Mm-hmm.
And when that episode aired, it really made Luana very famous into the whole culture of Brazil. Everybody knew that what she said, travesti não é bagunça, and became a catchphrase. So all of a sudden, she's being asked to help with like soap operas when there is a trans character, or she's talking to really famous people. So that really made Luana more what?
Well, I mean, famous, but also a lighthouse for, you know, the younger generation that saw that episode and sought her out of safety and guidance-ship or mentorship. And so there's like these two ways of it where, you know, the story is like kind of like, I don't know, whatever cheesy show that is an exploitation show. And that's how always Luana's represented.
Yeah.
And then, but that show brought this younger generation to her as a lighthouse. And so it's one of the last choices was to keep that in, because we had advice to just make it just, you know, the direct cinema all the way through. But it so perfectly encapsulates like how this community is represented, like usually. And then what a contrast it is to actually like know Luana, like
right,
for real, you know. So
yeah, it was really interesting. And then kind of we'll get to that other point in a minute, and because again, I don't want to spoil it quite yet, but let's talk about some of the other characters. So you've got Luana, who is kind of this matriarch, larger than life character, but very much is taking care of all of these women. Gabby, we'll talk a little bit about Gabby, because there are these moments between Gabby and Luana, whether or not they're directly interacting or just kind of in the same scene, so to speak. it's almost like this, it's like almost like this, not exactly like not like a passing of the torch necessarily, but like this contrast in like this really young and vibrant, like hopeful piece of this community. And you see that with some of the other younger girls as well, but just specifically with Gabby, because she emerged as this other like really strong supporting character, main character. And I guess I just want to talk a little bit about Gabby and how that came to be. As I read in a previous interview, that perhaps originally Gabby did not want to participate.
So it's not that she didn't want to participate. So that when Luana allowed us to film the first day, she said, here are 5 girls that you can follow, and they'll be in the house. I can guarantee you can follow them. And then we can ask the other girls if they want to be part of it or not.
Right.
And Gabi was just there all the time. No, Gabi was there when we were there. And I mean, she's so charismatic and so open. And we just started talking just as people and friends. And then we're like, hey, do you mind if we film you? And she's like, sure. And I mean, she's so interesting. And has so many touching, incredible stories.
Yeah.
That it was just natural to, with her permission, you know, to be in it, to film her, and as much as made sense.
And just strong and charismatic and just like, you know, wonderful. But each character was like that, where like we weren't planning for it. It's like where it just naturally went, you know. So the way I've described it before, I'll describe it again because I think it really relates, is like in a narrative, the onion is unpeeled. And then in this kind of documentary, it's like you start at the heart of trust, which is Luana, and then just the layers like sort of build out. So certain people weren't going to be in it. And even like the first day we were filming the 5 girls, and another girl would come through not wanting to be filmed. But then like the next day, she's like, oh, it's okay. Like we're friends and it's not, you know, so yeah.
I really enjoyed, and I've seen this film many, many times, but just really watching Gabby and Luana was just this really, it was always a very beautiful, dynamic, either conversation, presence, or just kind of like feeling of like what it might feel like to be in the room with those two very attention grabbing women, but also in very different ways. It's really beautiful to see that dynamic between the two. Speaking of some moments in the film, so there's a few that I wanted to talk about. I don't know that I necessarily have a question. This is a reminder to everybody who's tuning in to please send in your questions if you have any. As they get sent through me, I will absolutely make sure to ask them. But so a few moments. Let's see here. And when you guys are in the cab, I just thought it was like a really interesting, I don't know if she was speaking or if it ended up being a voiceover, but it was just this really beautiful moment of shooting behind Luana in the backseat of the cab, and you hear her voice, and then you just kind of like pan out to the streets of Lapa. I guess I don't really know what else to say about it, but it just really felt like a very important moment, very beautiful one. I don't know if there was any other context or something to that. That is one of those moments that just are forever ingrained in my mind about this particular film.
I mean, there were 6 of us in that car, in a small car. That's why it looks like she's in the middle of the car, which is a weird thing because she was literally sitting in no seat. Just like kind of. And that was after we spent the whole night with her, and she was doing that performance that is in the film. And so we just took a cab together back to the place, and as we were driving, the girls were out. And
in terms of the voiceover, it was not an interview. It was just like, she makes such declarative statements sometimes, and it's just like her and us. And she says it in such a definitive way of like, this is my philosophy of life, but it's not necessarily like a scene.
Right.
But it's like, it's just gold though. You're like, this is so beautiful. And so I started kind of putting into a folder like these little clips of these moments that didn't make a scene, but that were just a part of her philosophy that we kept hearing kind of repeat through the movie. And then that shot, there was 6 of us in a cab just kind of chit-chatting. It's not a scene either, but it's a beautiful shot.
Right.
And the movie's so dense with like beautiful language and conversation that the big note of the first couple of cuts is like it's way too dense. Like we need a moment of breath. And
Yeah.
so we decided to just have a moment like directly with Luana that just kind of breaks the film into 2 parts. So there's like the introduction and then like, you know.
It's like when she says in the beginning, like you're talking about these moments or these philosophies, she says something about you never light your cigarette with another cigarette.
Yeah.
Like it just like, I just like paused. Like I remember the first time I was like, you're right. Like it just was like, but the way that she says it is just like, it is a life philosophy.
Yeah.
And you know,
there's so many of them.
Yeah.
Yes, like I was telling you guys earlier, like I had to keep pausing and I'm writing all these things like the only star here is me, the others circle around me like a constellation.
Yeah.
Like just, it was so, and it was very beautifully placed also in the film. And anybody who's seen it up until this point or is about to see it, when that moment hits, it's very profound. And then, of course, like another one that since we're talking about it, my favorite thing to do is fan and to live. I'm a shining star in the sky that many will come to know, and I'll leave my legacy behind because I was born to shine. It's just like perfectly, just like perfectly, I feel like encapsulates just like the power and the strength and the beauty of this woman. She's like have like a book of like her philosophies. It's just,
I know.
It's really powerful.
It was really hard to edit for that reason as well, beyond the translation of just like cutting any of her out is like just a hard decision.
Yeah. So it is impressive to see the 70 thing. And again, I'm going into my programming brain, but also like it's, you know, kind of to straddle that with the emotional stuff of like capturing this woman and the rest of these women in the hostel in 73 minutes and knowing what you left on the cutting room floor, but yet still, you know, be able to express or show this woman's story, which kind of then I guess brings to the end. And this is a spoiler alert, and I'm sorry for anybody who hasn't watched. You can cover your ears, but so kind of you mentioned it earlier. Luana, she passed away in 2017. Is that right?
Yeah.
And so the way that you guys decided to treat, I saw was just essentially it was text at the end and no context. And again, kind of what you were talking about earlier with direct cinema and like kind of guiding. I know that I've seen this in another interview as well. Instead of kind of doing like the follow-up text screens, you just kind of left it. What led to the decision to handle obviously the very heartbreaking news, but what led to your decision to handle it that way within the film by just simply by giving no context to the viewer? But then how then, you know, she was unable to see the finished product.
That's the worst.
Yeah.
That like breaks my heart every day. I'm like horrified that happened, you know, because that was the real number one goal. Like we had dreams of like having Q&A in the 4 squares, Luana, and like, you know, or and just her seeing herself, like she never got to see what like the truth of what it is, you know. And in terms of the title card, it was not as hard a decision, but like when there are title cards, it enforces a narrative that you want to, it implies that the story is done. Like blah, blah, blah is blah, blah, blah now. And the end. And it has a kind of and life isn't like that, you know? Like life is a caption of time. Like we're going to press stop in this and then it'll be just there.
Right.
But we're experiencing it now. And then just on a other level is like, maybe it'll encourage people to Google about her and learn themselves, you know, about.
Which we see happen quite a bit.
Yeah.
We have seen people run on the streets when we're in film festivals to us after the film have shown, and they say, you know, I Googled her and I'm like obsessed and I'm learning all about this community, and like, thank you. And I think that that's also the power of film, is to give people a window to broaden their interests, and especially in humanity, and for us to take care of each other.
And I'll just add one more thing. You know, like what I really don't like about films about this subject, sex work, or, you know, these kind of topics, is the focus on death, like, which is a part of it, but it's not at all what we wanted to show. We want to show life, you know, so.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And, you know, I know this question has been asked of you guys quite a few times, and whether in interviews, Q&A settings. And so it's nice for our audience to be able to have that context, because it does really, because I think the first time I saw it, it was a little jarring, and you're like, no. And then it's so heartbreaking, but it makes sense because it was handled with a lot of care and obviously a lot of thought. And so I think it's important that, you know, obviously in our audience here, kind of that background or that context for that. Now, do you have any of the other girls, maybe Gabby or anybody, have they seen, women, have they seen the film?
Yeah, they have. They love it.
Great.
They really love it. And it's too sad though. We really tried, even before COVID, really hard to show the film in Brazil. And it never got picked up by any festival, by any organization. We have a terrible president in Brazil that it's really creating havoc in the film, in culture, in those industries. And he's really against the LGBTQ plus community. So violence has spiked against this community. So we think that maybe that has something to do with it, because our dream was always to watch it with them as part of a festival, have a Q&A in a movie theater.
Right.
That unfortunately never happened. So we shared with them to see it on our own. But hopefully one day we still can see it in Brazil all together with an audience, and have the audience be there to ask questions to them.
That'd be really amazing. Have you been back to Lapa at all?
No, we haven't been back to Brazil since, but right after the film ended, we finished filming. It was the end of the Olympics, and as usually happens in third world countries when they host the Olympics, the city and the state of Rio de Janeiro bankrupt. And so violence really erupted to the point that Lapa and a few other neighborhoods had to be under a curfew. So at 7 p.m., no one could be out on the street. So that really affected those businesses and the businesses of the girls. So a lot of girls left and went to other cities to find work. Mm-hmm. And some of them really changed. Mariana, the one that I was talking about, that, you know, fell in love in 4 hours. She's now going to, she's now almost a nurse. So she has left the sex work industry and is now going to become a nurse this year. And yeah, Lapa is still it's very different now, still in 2020 than it was in 2016.
Yeah. So, you know, and I didn't really connect those two, and I was thinking about that earlier, and I'm glad you mentioned the post-Olympics. You know, you read about it, and you know, I remember reading a lot of articles about kind of the devastation that happens. And so then to think about it, and specifically in this terms, in this particular community with this group of women, is just, so again, it's just a whole nother layer to this story, to the life experience of these women. Do you know what happened to the hostel or to the building? It's
still there.
It's still there. Is it still occupied, or who's it owned by now? Or
so it was Luana's. I still don't know exactly how the deed was passed. No one can answer me that. But what I do know is that one of the girls, a little bit older, she's the one who takes care of it now. But it's still pretty much used for the same thing. But there are less girls there. And what we see is, like, with the girls, is them just taking that spirit and inspiration, like the inspiring leadership of Luana, with them to wherever they go, and really changing in other markets how they take care of each other. So that's a really beautiful thing to see, a legacy of Luana living through these girls.
That's really beautiful. And also too, like how sex work is perceived by people, which is obviously a whole issue, but you know, it's really great that those women carry Luana on with them. We do have, there's a couple questions that have come in. So there was a moment that you and I had talked about earlier within the film that I had missed, and I don't want to pass up the opportunity to discuss it quickly before we jump to this question. So we're still talking about the content of the documentary and Luana. There was this moment where Luana is talking about her breast augmentations and the number of surgeries that she's had. And then she says something along the lines of, I won't cry about it. She said what, it was like 16 or 17 at that point. But it was the one time where I felt like she was looking directly at me, and like, or directly at obviously one of the two of you, or maybe directly into the lens. What was that moment like? Because it felt very different than the rest of these incredible, beautiful moments that you've captured throughout the film. But this one felt like it weighed really differently. Also with that eye contact and that connection briefly after that conversation.
Well, part of that, it was the only time there were other outsiders in the space.
Right.
And so there was a different kind of like trust / performance / thing going on, where they were there to kind of glamorize and to, you know, do that kind of a thing, do like kind of a fashion shoot. And at that point, the three of us were like buddies and kind of like just, so she's having this conversation with like another true outsider, which like there is almost never unless you're a client. Right. And they were there to do this kind of glamorous work with Luana because she's famous and everything. But we were kind of like her personal sidekicks, or like we had a different dynamic than they did. So it's like she's having this conversation, but knowing that we're hearing it, and then kind of like, you know, making sure that we're really hearing it differently. That's the only way I can make of that. But so, because every other time it's just the girls. There's no one. We never saw any other.
Yeah, I think the photographer too was trying to impose himself to be in a conversation with Luana, to be in the film. I think he had a motive to be part of this film. So he's the one when he's asking her about like, oh, remember when you didn't have one breast for many, like for a long time? That shows how long we know each other.
Yeah, and that kind of goes along with like the imposing questions part that makes me uncomfortable. That was kind of going on. So
that look and that feeling does obviously make that context.
Yeah,
there's like that unspoken language, like that nonverbal communication happening between, you know, I guess just everybody in that room. So one of the questions that came through, and thank you for giving context to that moment, because again, like I told you earlier, it was the first time I caught it after all of the times I have watched this film. I don't know why it's taken me to now to really like I said, I had to pause it and just sit with it for a minute.
Even like that layer, it has a layer of like from them, this kind of exploitative question, like, that's the question you're gonna ask, like about my breast and my personal.
That's the one you're going with, right?
In front of another camera, like that's I don't know.
It's like now you know who you're dealing with.
But it also shows the power of Luana is like, really? Okay, you know.
Right. It's really it's funny. So we do have a question from someone. Because I know it's getting 8:51. I do want to respect everyone's time. So to kind of get to some of our last few questions, we do have someone wanting to know, Ryan, our executive director. Hey, boss. He wants to know, do you guys have any new projects in the works as of right now? And how has the pandemic caused interruptions, whether it's with, you know, promoting Queen of Lapa, and or any of your future work? What are those disruptions? What has that been like? And what is the journey, I guess, for Queen of Lapa in light of the pandemic?
I mean, I can talk about the disruption. Yeah, we had 25 plus festivals that were going to show the film this year, and all over the world, and we were really excited to go to. So some of them have gone virtually, some of them have canceled. So that's a bummer. As far as projects, we were, because of the film and because of the film won an award in New York, we were approached by a production company that should pitch some other new work that we wanted to do. So we were in the process of that, and now that's kind of on a hold. But we hope to resume that once production can be resumed.
Sure.
And
then just while we're on lockdown, I've been writing my scripts. I kind of been finishing two. One's a feature, one's a comedy pilot, and working on other episodes of that, and just trying to stay sane, you know.
Right. All of us just really trying to stay sane. You know, and what, you know, I have, and I heard you guys talk about this before, but I've also, you know, Miriam's asked this of other filmmakers in previous discussions, and it's always really interesting to hear, you know, in what ways perhaps has the pandemic benefited the journey of this particular film and getting Luana story out there? Are there any really specific or tangible ways in which this almost, there's somewhat of a blessing in promoting?
It's so hard to tell. It's impossible to know, really.
Yeah, I mean, last week, the film launched into virtual theaters.
Yeah.
I think because they are virtual now, more theaters picked up. Okay, I don't know. Maybe if it was in person, maybe not. But, you know, with the end goal for us is to have as many people watch this film, hopefully, because the behavior has changed, that it's more acceptable for you to sit in front of your laptop or watch something virtually. Hopefully more people are watching the film and learning about her life and learning about this community more and getting, feeling more engaged and inspired to be part of the conversation of, you know, protecting the LGBTQ community, and being an active ally to make people feel safe, to make sure that people have the same equal rights. And so hopefully more people are watching it in places that otherwise the film wouldn't have reached.
Right. Well, that's important. So then, in what ways, for our audience watching, I know that I'll probably get a lot of these follow-up questions, you know, in what ways can people support this film or support or learn more about Luana and who she was as an activist and her legacy? So what are some ways to support the film, but also learn more about Luana?
To support the film, just share with your friends that the film exists. Our website is queenoflapa.com. And if you go there, you can learn all about the film, Luana, and also where it's showing right now. A lot of LGBTQ organizations are showing this week the film, and 50% of the proceeds stays with them. So that's a way to support their favorite LGBTQ community. And I would say to support, I think just what I said before is become an inspired protagonist in protecting LGBTQ lives and communities, and learn and be active in learning on what you can do in your own block, in your own backyard, to make people feel safe and seen and equal.
And that was really beautifully said, because I do want to take a moment when you said in your own backyard. I do want to mention a few organizations in Memphis that are doing really inspired and amazing work within the LGBTQ community in our own backyard. And this is by no means a comprehensive list. It's just a few that I wanted to mention. First, we have Out Memphis. They empower, connect, and educate and advocate and act as advocates for the LGBT community in the Mid-South. You can learn more about them and their mission at outmemphis.org. Another organization is My Sista's House, and that's SISTAH''S. They provide emergency housing and peer support for Black trans women. You can learn more about them and the work that they do at mshmemphis.org. And last and certainly not least, two other ones, the Corner and the Haven. Those are two spaces that are dedicated to HIV prevention and sexual health. Both the Corner and the Haven can be found on Facebook. Again, this is not meant to be a comprehensive list, but just a few organizations that you can get started with looking at, learning more about, and figuring out other ways to help, support, volunteer, donate. I think that might be a good note to wrap things up. Carolina, Teddy, you know I'm huge fans of your work. You guys are two of my favorite people. Thank you so much for being here with us and having, helping us have another amazing Tuesday night movie, Indie Memphis Movie Club discussion.
Thank you,
Thank
Brighid.
you so much.
Forever be our film angel. Brighid, our film angel. And thank you, Indie Memphis, for having us and showing the film. We are honored. Really,
thank you guys again. And again, don't forget queenoflapa.com to learn more about Luana, as well as different ways to support the film. Teddy, Carolina, thanks again. Love you both. Talk soon. Good night, everybody. Thanks for joining.
Good night.